Thanks for coming, those of you here and those of you online. I'm Mike O'Day, and I'm from computer science. What I'd like to sort of present today is almost like a position statement to say, with the impact of GenAI, do we now need to revisit our graduate attributes? Not just here at the University of York, but across the entire sector. And the background to this is, like probably everyone in this room, I do have a significant interest in the impact of GenAI on teaching and learning. And I think that we have done already some good work on looking at the impact on assessment. But I think now is the time to kind of look on from that, look forward from that. And the obvious thing then is to look at industry and how well equipped our graduates are to both survive but enable industry as well in the future. So I'm starting off with this here, this slide, which forms the basis of really my motivation. And that is this. We are currently considered to be in Industry 4.0. Whether we fully are or not is debatable, and I'm not from business studies, so I can't sort of firmly come down one way or another, but I'm using it as my framework. And the idea is that we should be moving into Industry 5, which, as I'll talk about in a minute, is a far more acceptable use of AI. So that's where I'm starting from. And the reason for that, for me thinking, and for most of us thinking, is this idea of AI replacing jobs. So we're seeing already some of the low-skilled jobs, warehouse jobs, clerical jobs, being replaced by AI, by robotics, by AI-enabled automation. And that's been happening for quite a while. But we're also seeing now some of what were considered to be safer middle-skilled jobs also being impacted significantly by AI. So things like journalists. There are still plenty of high-quality journalists, but I'm sure you will have realised or noticed, like I have, a lot of journalist stuff now is written by GenAI. You can spot it. And it's not very interesting, it's not very good, but it now is increasingly more of the content. There are high-skilled jobs that won't be impacted, which is good. My daughter wants to become a dentist, so hopefully she'll be all right. But we're seeing essentially Industry 4, which is characterized by these things, reducing the human involvement and sometimes replacing it. That's not good for our graduates. That's not good for us as society either, I don't think. So if we look at Industry 5, which is something that the EU came up with about 4 or 5 years ago now, this is what they describe Industry 5, which is a much more acceptable use of AI in industry. So it's human-centric rather than being technology driving it. It's augmented AI. Humans working with AI to make the end result better. It's not replacing humans. Okay? And I'm not so sure about this, but this is what they're saying. The impact should be sustainability, resilience. We have a way of subverting technology for things that we don't really work well, but this is the idea. And the overall aim is not just purely efficiency, which is Industry 4, but more than that. So this is, I've just realized on screen, is a horrible slide. Okay. But essentially what I'm trying to do is compare the two in a little bit more detail. But the important things really here are With Industry 4, we're using AI to replace Industry 5. As I said, new AI with augmenting humans is new skills. Okay. Other than that, I think it's fairly straightforward. And when I was reviewing the slides not so long ago, I realized I put far too much on Industry 5, so I'm going to skip over it quite quickly. For example, this one, which really just says the same as the last slide, really in a different way. But I hope you get the idea of what I'm trying to point out with this is where we want to be, and we need to create graduates with the skill set to enable this, to work with AI, to be adaptable, flexible, to work with not just GenAI, because that happens to be the technology that is hitting us at the moment. There will be another one on the scene, whether it's in a year's time or 5 years' time. Quantum computing is the one that sort of seems to be lurking on the horizon. And that will also be a disruptive technology that may also change our ways of working. And our graduates have to be able to adapt and work with it. And hopefully then, if things go as the EU would like it to be, then we end up with a better, more sustainable use of technology and integration of technology. That's the important thing. What does this movement mean for our graduates? How do we prepare them? Are they prepared? What do we need to do? That's the sort of the quick background. So this is where I started looking at graduate attributes. So generally speaking, these are the kind of things that literature are saying Industry 5 requires or needs. That's the same word, isn't it? So things like they need to be technology literate. Okay. Innovation and creativity are the important skills. What they need to be applied to is complex problem solving. If we are going to work with AI, and if we are going to employ AI for the good of society, our graduates need to be emotionally intelligent, EQ rather than IQ, or EQ in addition to IQ. These are not new. Adaptability, lifelong learning. We already have that as a strong theme through our graduate attributes, as do we with digital literacy, but data literacy is something slightly different. Collaboration and communication is also something that we endeavour to instill in our graduates through graduate attributes and through our learning and teaching. And ethics and values, which actually, when I was looking at them, is sometimes in and sometimes out, which I found a little bit surprising. So if we look at these and saying these are the attributes or the basis upon which our graduate attributes should be focused upon, are our graduates, do they have those skills? And the next stage on, do our organizations, if they have those skills, or with the current skill set, are our organizations ready for Industry 5? So if that's what we're looking for, where are we at the moment? So our graduates' employability skills or attributes, they're pretty much the same thing, okay? How well do they map to what we need? So I did a little mapping exercise. So these are our University of York ones. Okay, I hope they're the right ones because they're the ones that I grabbed off the university website. And what I did was I mapped across. So with Industry 5, technology literate, we are asking our graduates to be digitally capable, which is appropriate for Industry 4. But is it appropriate for Industry 5? We have innovative thinkers, which I think maps pretty closely. Okay. Problem solvers, complex problems. I think the reason why I've highlighted the red is I think that it's a different level of problem solving. And when I talk to industry, what industry continually tells me, and I hope I'm not the only one, is that we need our graduates to be better problem solvers. And I come back often saying, but hang on, that's what we focus upon. We teach them how to divide a problem. We teach them how to sort of stepwise. We teach them how to use patterns. We teach them how to approach from different perspectives. And they say, yes, that's all well and good, but that's not the problem solving we want. And I ask them, well, what do you want? And I'm not quite sure. And I don't think they're sure, but what they are consistently saying is, it's not quite what we want. And I think that's what they are talking about. And I think we need to figure out what that is. Emotional intelligence, I think that maps to these things here. Adaptability and lifelong learning. I think we've got two here, but when I look at our graduate attributes and the descriptions, I think we're very strong on that. Okay. And then we have data literacy, and there isn't a mapping. Collaboration and communication, and we have that too. And then in the York ones, ethics and values, they aren't explicit there. Although when I looked at some of the departmental graduate attributes, I looked at science and I looked at one of the education ones, it was there. So I think we're aware of it, it's just perhaps not. And when I went back and I looked at York St John ones, they're remarkably similar. So I think it is really in these two areas that I see preparation of our graduates for Industry 5, and even Industry 4 as it is, where we've not got a good handle. So when I speak to, or when I look at the literature and also speak to Industry 2, a number of things come up. Okay. The first thing is a more holistic set of skills, which, again, when I spoke to them, my computer science graduates, they're pretty good. But what they're saying is, we want them also to be like more the creative. So we want them to have not just the technical skills, we want them to have the ability to think and operate like humanities, arts and humanities, social sciences as well, which I found quite tough to sort of see how we would do it. Interdisciplinary collaboration is something that I think all of us as educators would like, and it's hard. And this thing here, ambidextrous employees, which was a new term that I came up with, or that I came up against. I didn't come up with it. And it essentially means this. What they want is the ability to exploit new technologies and explore them. And I think that's where this holistic comes across, holistic skills. I might be caricaturing, but typically we think of this is what the more creative of our graduates are good at, and this is what more of our technological graduates are good at. My best graduates have both of these, but I don't know whether that's by chance, their own abilities, or them developing the skills themselves. And so I think we need to be aware of this is the kind of employee that industry is looking for. Are we explicitly focusing on developing those? What's the next step? Where do we go as universities? This is not my slide, but I thought I'd use it as a good base point. Future-proof the curriculum. I think For me, that basically means we need to reconsider what our graduate attributes are, how we develop them. Yes, I know we develop them in consultation with industry, but does that need to be a stronger bond? How frequently do we develop them? I know that certain universities, for example, where I come from, they were developed once, and we haven't revisited them since. And GenAI came along 4 years ago. It's had a massive impact, but I don't see, and I had a look at the graduate attributes of some of the other universities as well, I don't see those being updated and reflected. I think that's because graduate attributes aren't a process. And maybe they need to be a process. So this future-proofing the curriculum means that building graduate attributes or revisiting them becomes part of almost our curriculum development, just as we would do for any subject. Rapid technological advancement. As universities, not just us, it took us a long time to deal with GenAI. There was a lot of prevarication about how we deal with it. There was sometimes burying heads in the sand, hoping it might go away. And we focused on the most important thing, or the thing that impacted us most, assessments. And we haven't really looked much beyond that. There are lots of people doing good work on how we use GenAI to improve our learning and teaching, but there's no, how should I put it? We can't see that coming through in the pedagogy development and things like that. I think universities need to be much quicker to embrace new technologies. We at York were pretty quick in bringing on Google Gemini to our staff and students. I know that some other universities still don't have official licenses. We were good at that. And I'd like to see us sort of have universities have a specific policy that will be fast, will be quick to work with these things. And lifelong learning, again, I think we've got that pretty good. But it needs to be, I think that is the driver for this process. If we start there, and if we look at this as a cyclical process, then I think that will drive these two things. Whether it's that way or that way, I don't really care. I've seen lots of strategies for how to deal with this, essentially. So I thought, well, this might be a good idea a good framework within which to place our revisiting or reconceptualization of graduate attributes. And again, I thought we're pretty good with these in terms of my knowledge of developing graduate attributes, except I don't see these coming through so explicitly as the others, which kind of maps back to the gaps that I saw in the mapping process with Industry 5 to graduate attributes. It's the same things coming through again and again. Where do I see the solutions lying? Those of you that know me could have probably predicted I would say this. I'm a great advocate of AI literacy, but I honestly do think that AI literacy needs to be, if not embedded in our curriculum, I think it needs to be taught across the entire university, both for subjects, staff, student, and professional services as well. I think we have a lot of catching up to do to get a handle on GenAI. In terms of learning and teaching, I would like to also see a move towards more authentic assessment. Personally, I think there's a place for exams, closed book exams, but I don't think that's the right option for dealing with GenAI or the next next technological, new technology that comes along. I think that perhaps we might see this, especially if we work with more and more with industry. And this is coming through soft skills and EQ, and I'll have to hold my hand up and say, I haven't a clue how to teach that. I'll say I'm a computer scientist. We do have soft skills in computer science. In software engineering, we've got the agile methodology came from computer science, but we may not notice that. And in other disciplines as well, this might be missing. And so I think we need to learn from each other about how to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating, Michael. I just wanted to ask about some of your solutions. So the authentic assessment and having scenario-based learning and problem-solving and industry-led challenges. That's something that careers and placements has always sort of advocated for, and something that we're involved in various pockets around the university. But having that at scale across the university is a challenge. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, on how we could build confidence of academic staff and also build a solid base of a network with industry, so that that could be something sustainable and something that could be, perhaps a calling card of York, that this is something that we offer, but something that we could deliver sustainably.
From personal experience, and mine is data science with the subdiscipline within computer science. What I have found recently is that one of the problems with data science is getting real life data sets. Basically, the discipline doesn't work if we don't have data. But what I've been working with recently is AI generated synthetic data, which means that I don't have to continually go searching around, spend half of my time getting data or reusing stuff from Kaggle, that there's almost certainly an answer on GenAI, and even sometimes already posted on GitHub or the whatever. So I'm maybe lucky in that I can generate semi-realistic and actually, in fact, quite close to realistic data sets that form case studies. And I can then have a set of similar case studies that are based on real life, but then I can supplement the data that I had before to change it each time. So for me, in data science, the complexity of the problem was with the data, because the tools and the techniques we use and the process we use, I'm trying to teach my students how we standardize that. And I think it comes back to then complexity. I think we need to focus on the complexity of the problem and teach our students who have come up through an assessment system from school that there's always a right answer, that sometimes it's a fuzzy answer. It's not a conclusive answer. And that's, for me, some of the fundamentals of authentic assessment. There are lots of other aspects of it, but I think in industry, from what I've been speaking to industry, they're interested in, we need to get here, and you've taught them that this is the correct way to do it, but actually sometimes we just need to get there. And so it's about, again, complex problem solving, the ability to adjust, the ability to, how should I put it, get there and then come back and see, right, I've got there this way, is that the right way? Does that answer your question properly?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting idea to use AI to generate the data, and for that to be. How do you know that that's replicating an industry situation?
There's two ways you can do it. Firstly, you can generate your synthetic data from real life data. So it has the same characteristics. Or you can generate it from scratch to be a caricature. So at the lower or the more sort of basic levels, I want my data to have certain characteristics. And yes, it's not real life, but there's certain things I want to teach. And if I'm talking about missing data, I want to generate a data set with certain types of missing data. Whether it's random, whether it's actually not random, whether it's systematic, because I want to show certain principles. And there's a particular type of missing data called missing not at random, which is really difficult to find in real life, but which you can simulate. So that gives me the ability to use AI to help me. And I think GenAI is very good at generating scenarios. If we teach our tutors, or if our tutors learn prompt engineering and how to use GenAI, I think you can get some very close to real life scenarios generated from that. And that is much quicker than doing it from scratch. So I think to combat GenAI, we can actually sometimes use it. So that's the way I would approach it. But for different disciplines, it's going to be different approaches. But the best way I can do is to give you my own experience.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, I'm not sure if what I would say is a question.
Okay.
More of my thoughts about the discussion on using AI in general. I think there is a dilemma whether actually university should be responding and to meet the needs and requirements of industry, or to challenge and enhance and improve and so on. So I think the main problem with the AI use is like the industry is already ahead of us. So they are leading and we are trying to catch up. So they are setting the rules. And currently our role is to meet the requirements, while our role it should be like leading and driving and orienting this to the right direction. But we are still discussing our academic problems, like assessment of AI generated things and so on. But like the industry itself is changing, and the roles of, like, for example, from architecture, and some roles in the industry are currently changing because of the use of the AI. And even with the professional bodies and so on, they are discussing, in my opinion, they are discussing which apps and softwares and tools they would be using and in which way, and the ethics of using these, while these tools are actually still evolving and developing very fast. So when I start learning something, it changes and then it vanishes because something more develops. So it's all chaotic and it's unclear. And our role is, okay, we want to lead this.
Yeah.
But before leading it, we need to learn, actually. Yeah. So I'm not sure where our position is exactly. We can't be discussing currently whether the use of AI is applicable or essential, or like, this is a fact currently, and that's it.
No, I agree with you entirely. We're in the position at the moment with GenAI where we're reacting. Whereas as academics, for most of my career, I was used to being in a position where we're ahead of industry, where we're being proactive. So when I first came out of university working in databases, for example, when I went to the company, my bosses were saying, tell us about this thing called third normal form, which won't mean anything to you, but it was something that I was taught that industry didn't use. But now, firstly, GenAI hit us very, very quickly. And secondly, we were having to react to it to deal with our own problems. So I think what I was trying to say here, which I think you have probably distilled much better than I have, or certainly you've helped me with my head, was that this here, as academics, we need to also be given the space and the opportunities to work with new technologies. I guess we didn't see GenAI coming unless you were in computer science. And so we weren't working with it. And then all of a sudden it just came. And as you say, we had to deal with it. We had to deal with the problems that were most pressing to us first, which was assessment. Because basically, we know we can't detect it. We know that at least 95% of our students, and probably more, are using it. So we had to deal with that. But we also, at York, we were given Gemini quite quickly, but I know at other universities, academics had to pay for it themselves. So I think that universities do need to think about, actually, sometimes if a new technology is expensive, we still might need to invest in it, because that way we can still, if not shape the narrative, at least be a little bit ahead of industry. And again, if we go back here, when I speak to industry, yes, they're ahead of us technology-wise, but they're not in terms of ethics. I was amazed at some of the comments I got back from people in industry who were saying, we don't care how we use it. We're not interested in the ethics or whatever. We just want to get to there. And so just like when I first went into industry and I was teaching good practice, or if not teaching, then certainly came with a tool set about what is good practice, which then my company took on board. I think our graduates have the same role still. You know, this is good practice. This is what we should be doing. This is what we could be doing. And certainly there's a big gap there at the moment from industry.
Thanks very much, Mike. It's been really useful to see and hear this. So I'm from politics, and we are in the foothills. I'm kind of leading on this for my own interest. In the foothills of thinking through how we as a department, at least, need to adapt to the realities of what generative AI can produce, particularly in terms of student assessment. And it's clear, at least to me, that the capabilities of generative AI are fundamentally requiring us to rethink how and what we teach and assess in quite foundational ways.
Yes.
And I think the problem that we have is not just the speed with which generative AI is upon us, but the speed at which it will change. Changing curricula, certainly in our department, is a slow, cumbersome, very iterative process.
Not just your department, every department.
So let's say in an ideal situation, in 2 years' time, we feel like, of course, our GenAI capabilities will be exponentially further ahead than where they are now. So this is a real challenge. And for me, this has been useful because the obvious but incredibly difficult conclusion is that really these competencies should be the basis upon which, the foundation upon which we build our teaching and learning programs, not some hoped for outcome based on a fairly outdated assessment regime that we certainly have imposed. But that's really challenging. And I think part of the challenge for us is having the time and the space as individually, as module leaders, program conveners, and so on, and as a staff body to do this. I mean, it's to take it seriously. I think it's root and branch stuff. And that's really challenging, right? So you get the ostrich effect. It's just easier to put your head in the sand. So I don't know what your experience has been of the reality of the enormity of the challenge, and then having, where that meets just a day-to-day of teaching and managing, administrating a university department.
Yeah, I think I would respond. There's two sort of strands to how I would answer that. The first one is technology and technology capability. Now, I'll give you an example. Personally, I bloody hate mobile phones. I absolutely detest them. The standing joke at home is that, Daddy, you can program mobile phones, but you can't use them. It's not that I can't use them, I can't be asked.
Right.
They're small little computers, they have crappy interfaces, and they continually annoy me by beeping at me. Okay. But last summer I thought, Christ, I've got to get the banking on this, and I've got to do this, and I better learn it. So I did. And now I don't detest them, I just actively dislike them, which is a little bit lower on the scale. But I think it's about, the first thing is about capability. If you don't know how to use something and nobody is teaching you, it becomes incredibly difficult to get on top of it. It becomes incredibly difficult to embrace it. So I think for a department, for all departments across the university, I think there needs to be, and I'm banging again and again and again, AI literacy. I think just like we had digital literacy, where everyone was dragged, kicking and screaming, well, not everybody, but everybody was brought to a level where we used the VLEs for teaching and learning. Some people used it more, other people still had to get to a base level capability. And I think we need to do that with GenAI. At the very least, have the basics of prompt engineering, understand how it works, be able to have a good idea of what its capabilities are too. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, with assessments, actually, once I got the hang of GenAI, I thought it was better, because what it enabled me to do was to focus on the higher order thinking skills. So one of the last things I did at York St John before I came here to York was one of my assessments. I ran it through GenAI, and I printed out the results. And the first lecture after I released the assessment, I stuck it up on the board and I went through it. I said, "This is what GenAI has done. Here you can see what it is. Your answer has to be better. And it has to be better in this way. I don't want a technical spec, although I'm asking you for a technical spec. I don't want the detail. What I want to see is how you analysed it, how you approached the problems, and so on and so forth, where you added over and above." So I think that if we approach it that way, it takes away the boring stuff. There's still a place for in first year to say, no, you can't use GenAI. I use GenAI when I've forgotten what a program function does. But I get the answer right because I already knew how to program. So with the AI assessment scale, there is a place to say no GenAI, no AI. But I think once we get higher up, we should be embracing it, incorporating it. And how do we incorporate it? That's where our industry and authentic assessment feeds in. So it's much better or easier to assess the higher order thinking. Does that kind of...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the challenge, I think, is we want to assess students on a range of higher order skills and capabilities that are, in some sense, distinctly human, rather than qualities, skills that can be replicated or simulated by machine. But that's a challenge, distilling the two and designing assessments to both develop and reward this core set of distinctly human attributes when there's such grey overlap area. I mean, we can prompt ChatGPT to stimulate creative critical thinking. But, and that's one of the core attributes we want to assess in our students, creative critical thinking. And you think, well, GenAI can't do that. Well, with some clever prompts, it can.
It can do. But then the skill then is the clever prompts. And also the skill too is for when you're setting the assessment, a meaningful assessment would come from industry. So forgive me if I'm sort of, caricaturing politics, but I suppose what you may have to do is go to a politician and say, look, when someone's writing your speech, if, what's the important bit? And what's the bit that, because your speechwriter is almost certainly going to be using GenAI, which is the bit that you value their input. Because then when we're creating the graduates that are good at that, that's where we're working with AI, and AI is augmenting us. That's how I would approach it.
Can I ask about, so thinking of future-proofing, and the comment about, okay, so you want to ban it in the first year, so okay, no, the first year, we're going to keep it clean and focus on the core skills. How will that work future-proofing when obviously a few international, Switzerland, UAE, China are integrating it into their primary and secondary education? Those students are going to come over here having already got quite a lot of AI skills. And I reckon eventually we'll probably do the same. I think got the recent investments come in. How are we going to make sure that there's not this sort of, is there an interruption when they come to us that we have to break that? Or is there a smoother way? I don't know.
That's a really good point, Phil. I think actually, we're focused on AI literacy at university because our students are coming through with no AI literacy. But I honestly believe that AI literacy should start at school. But we have a problem as well in that certainly in this country and probably in most of the other countries, there's kids coming through school are simply focused on passing assessments. That's all they want to learn. And yes, the best students and the better students like to learn for learning's sake, but a lot of them have come through on this regime of pass the assessment, which makes it kind of difficult for us to say, look, you need to learn this because you might have a short-term gain by using GenAI, but the long-term gain by not using it is better for you because they just simply say, no, I just want to pass the assessment. But I think maybe, and certainly in computer science, we might be able to produce technical environments that don't allow AI to be used for certain things like maybe programming and computer science. There still might be the place for time-constrained face-to-face assessments. I think that's the hardest bit. And hopefully with the focus on, well, a lot of the research says students actually don't want to cheat. They are concerned about cheating their GenAI use. And I think if, by using, for example, that we're piloting the GenAI assessment framework, if you do come out and say, no AI is to be used in this, then the onus is on the student to actively cheat rather than inadvertently cheating. And then if the penalties are there, they can't then say, oh, I didn't know, or it wasn't clear.
So is that for if you have an assessment like the essay, and you're saying don't use AI in this essay, is that not a problem in that that's a rule that's incredibly difficult to enforce?
It is.
Unless you have a proctored, shut down, handwritten paper, at which point students keep saying we know they do no, I didn't use it, and you can't prove it. An academic misconduct case, very difficult to go through. And
so that's why I'm saying sometimes we might have to go, right, you've got a short 20-minute session where you have to write.
So a no AI prohibitive sort of tier or level category, for me, I would say that has to be a self-fulfilling assessment. This is an exam. You can't use AI, so don't use AI. Or this is an OSCE where it's not available to you. So I get it.
So just because we've got GenAI doesn't mean we have to use it. It's certainly appropriate in certain circumstances for certain subjects at certain levels for the tutor to be able to say no.
It would feel to me to legitimate to do that if time constraint was something that you intentionally want to assess as well.
Mm.
And if not, then other methods of trying to distill and then assess the actual skills that you want to assess seem to become really important. I mean, if it's an essay, nobody look at shouldn't be an assessment at all, it should be a learning process. Or if it is an assessment, then maybe keep hearing this idea about process folios. They're like a portfolio, but there's one output, and you assemble evidence as you go along, you're thinking, planning, or integration AI, what the output was maybe, but not just what the output was and paste that into appendix. Actually talk about how it.
A lot of stuff here about the process of product, and products are an output of learning, but what we're evaluating is like the tip of an iceberg, whereas actually all the stuff underneath is evaluating all the papers they read, proofreading it, getting peer feedback, rewriting, all that sort of stuff we want to see when we're assessing learning.
That's
what we
authentic
get.
assessment.
Yeah, that's like the 10% of the work is what we see. Yeah.
I mean, all through my longer than I'd like career in learning technology, I've heard people talk about paradigm shifts, assessment's going to change completely and so on. And then it's not kind of really happening. But this feels like it kind of is going to happen.
I think it is a
Probably
revolution.
because the way we live is going to change and the way we operate is going to change. And as a result of that, it's hard to imagine that any programs will have the same learning outcomes unless they're really prepared to bury their heads in the sand in 10 years' time, as they have now.
I think
I've got a question. So we talk a lot about human-centric in terms of addressing the disruption of generative AI, but I think quite resonant with your what you said before about our approach to graduate attribute or all the competencies that we're reacting, or what we really educate the student come to the university. We're trying to also develop some kind of skills so they can survive in the world, or they're going to be the leader of the future world. So when we talk about the human-centric, what do we mean by human? Are we, train more capable human to deal with the coping and to make a living in the world, or we kind of force the next generation to have much more autonomy agents that come through? Because I think that's the core question. Because I feel like this is all about coping, how to cope with those disruptions. But then if you're constantly coping, I think that's where people are talking about AI, okay, because you are sick of it. And there's a limit. And also that is people constantly coping something. It's really, really instrumental to their confidence. Because I feel like currently myself and my colleagues and students, people, they can learn new things, but then the barrier for their learning is about confidence. Because normally people will feel, I'm not confident to be an AI user. So I think that's essentially related to the learner autonomy or the agents in learners.
I think it's related to all of these things.
Mm.
So if I can just come back to before, the reason why we would want to say no AI is to give the foundation knowledge and the basic skills that when our students do pick up AI, they're not just coping with it, but they're competent with it and they're confident with it. And so, yes, GenAI hit us fast and it hit us hard, and we're trying to catch up now. And I guess what I'm trying to say here with graduate attributes and the focus on graduate attributes is this is how I think we get ahead. And if we look at the process of graduate attributes, I'm just using GenAI as an example because it's pertinent, then if we start thinking of graduate attributes as a process, then the next one that comes along, we will be ready. We might not be ahead of the game, but certainly we'll be ready or able to respond faster. So we won't then be in the situation now where we've spent the last 4 years really dealing with how do we cope with the most immediate problem, which is assessment. And I know it might be premature, but what I want to say is that try and swim out of that, poke your head above and see, well, what's the next thing? How do we get on top of this thing?
I'm afraid it's robot dentists, Mike.
I want to retire. I want to retire and be kept in a life of luxury.
Is there a so the old binary doesn't really work. It's like chicken and egg.
Mhm.
And like previously, when we've had technological changes in education, like VLEs you mentioned earlier, we implemented them. We said what we wanted and we introduced them and we delivered the training mandatory. This time, this is external to us. It's impacting us, but it's completely out of our control. Students have access, we can't deny it and all this. And we're now in this stage. So we're talking about, do we need to change the attributes? And we haven't looked at our learning outcomes. Well, York St. John hasn't, which where I'm from, sorry, the British myself. York St. John hadn't yet looked at the learning outcomes, but we were saying like, these aren't going to work. But yeah, but we need to change them. And as you've said, it's a long slog of a process to go from changing these things, which is painful. But at the same time, we haven't really done the full-fledged sort of getting everyone on our staff up to speed. And there's a piece in the Times of Higher Education last week about you need to deliver staff training before you change policies. Because at the same time, there are staff who are still doing their head in the sand sort of thing. It's like, but we can't change the policy. We can't make an attribute that says we're all going to be, AI proficient. If there are clusters of staff who are saying, no, we're not doing this, we're like, we're going to end up with a student putting a hand saying, excuse me, I was promised AI education and I ain't getting it. And that chicken and egg, we're not sure whether we've got a chicken or an egg at the minute, but we just know it's outside of our control.
Yeah, you're right in that previously we've been ahead of the game. And this is, I think, the first time that we're finding ourselves trying to catch up. And this is, it's not a silver bullet. It's just part of the silver buckshot, hopefully, just one element. But this is one element of trying to get us ahead, trying to get us to cope. And again, if we think of these as not set in stone, but we look at a process, then the next one that comes along, we can be faster, and maybe in 2 or 3 iterations, we might be ahead of the game if we sort of, keep learning. What else were you saying? Because I just got stuck in my head, chicken and egg. You see, I watched QI the other day, and they said it's definitely the egg that comes first because dinosaurs had eggs and they were before chickens.
Solve that one.
Yeah.
But you're always going to have technology acceptance. You're going to have people who are laggards. You're going to have early adopters. You're going to have
We've definitely got the bulk of people are people who kind of like the colleague just left out saying, who are just probably not so confident and are feeling so like, oh, this is getting away from me. Then we did a survey, and I think it was like 8% were like really like, no, I do not want this. There's probably 8% on the other side who are like, absolutely, I'm going to use it for everything. We didn't capture them. But the bulk of people are that sort of, I'm using a bit of it, or I'm not quite confident enough in mine to deliver this yet. I get that. I suppose you kind of hinted at earlier, would you make training mandatory on this, like we did with VLEs when we introduced those?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Because as I say, you're always going to get the people who simply will not use it. But what you're interested in really are the people who lag behind our median and bringing them up to speed. Because you and I all well know when we were undergraduates or postgraduates, you always had a lecturer in the corner that thought that whiteboards were, and they, well, maybe not whiteboards, but you know what I mean.
Showing range, there are blackboards, whiteboards, or interactive boards. Yeah.
PEs.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I still, I remember I was speaking to an old friend of mine. He was saying that in the maths department, not ours, but in where he is, the maths lecturers still use chalk with all the sort of the 8 blackboards, because they still think that's better than using whiteboards or interactive whiteboards. And you're always going to get people that go, no, this old technology still works better for me. And that's fine. You're never going to convince those. But what we want is we want the majority to be confident to decide what works for them and decide whether they're going to embrace it, incorporate it or not. But at least you give them the tools to make that decision and make an informed decision. That's how I would look at it. Claire?
And just carrying on the same topic of kind of detractors or.
You haven't been talking to Chris, have you, beforehand?
But with the GenAI assessment framework that's being rolled out at the moment, colleagues who I've spoken to about how that's going, one of the main concerns that people are raising is sustainability. And so I was interested when you mentioned the Industry 5, and there were sort of 3 pillars of that, and one of them was sustainability and the circular economy. Obviously, it does use a huge amount of water, it's going to be have environmental impact negative. So I wonder what are your thoughts on sort of approaching that with colleagues for whom that's a concern?
Yeah. So for me, and I'm only talking from my perspective because it's maybe not the same for politics or architecture or whatever, but when we were talking about, Richard was talking about assessment, Robert.
Yeah.
And then Chris talked about process. Well, you know, that's authentic assessment process. And I think that process is difficult for us to assess at the moment because we haven't got the history of assessing it. But once we start assessing it more frequently, and once we start focusing more on the assessing process rather than output, I think we're going to find that it becomes more sustainable for us to do it. And we might be adjusting our rubrics, marking rubrics and whatever, to then, instead of focusing on the output, again, focusing on the assessment without having to throw resources at it. Bear with me just for a second, because I think many people think the best way to process assessment is to interview students and say, what did you do? And that is not sustainable.
No, I totally agree. Probably because, like, from my architecture, teaching architecture experience, we focus more, particularly in design, my area, we assess the process more than the outcome. So the outcome is mainly a process with an end product that is to a great extent subjective if it's not justified through the process. And I like when you said, like, the reason not to use AI is providing this fundamental and foundation things. Like, because I believe currently the AI is a tool at everyone's fingertips, and we are using it. So we can't really prevent it unless it's justified. So you can't use AI in this assignment because we are looking for this and that. So it's this, like, it's clear for the student, it's for their benefit because they need to develop some skills first so they can use the AI or the tool more efficiently. We always have, like, this knowledge and tools. For example, in architecture, when I was studying, like, computer was, like, still, like, AutoCAD and so on were still, like, coming up. Like, and those who learned AutoCAD were the stars of the industry. So in education, if you learn AutoCAD, you will be a super student as well. But after a while, those who focused on the CAD became technicians. So the balance is very important. So currently we need to teach the tool, but we need to teach the tool as part of the process. For example, like, I haven't applied to this yet because, like, we are still starting the course of architecture. But my intention is, like, okay, opening it to use prompts and AI, like GenAI. But I would like to see the students' prompts and discuss why they use these prompts and why they wrote it in this way, how it can be improved, the relation between because this is very challenging for me because I've been teaching students to think through drawing, so not through writing. because this was a problem that I had with most students starting their courses. Currently, I need to learn how to start thinking through text and writing prompts, because that's not something that I'm trained on. So, and I totally agree that the process, assessing the process is the way forward. And I've never seen it actually otherwise since I started teaching.
Well, I think maybe disciplines like yours, where the focus is much more on process, can provide us with help for the rest of us in terms of how do you go about it. We can learn from each other. We all have an assessment in every single one of our disciplines that focus on process, the dissertation, where the output is far less significant in the marking scheme than the process. So we all have at least one module where assessment is on process. I'm not saying that everything becomes a dissertation, but it's not such a big leap for us to be able to take some of what we do there and cut it down or slice it and dice it for different modules. But also I would say that, you know, disciplines like architecture, like fine art, for example, they can teach a lot. They can teach the rest of us a lot about how to focus on process and how to assess it.